Yep.
Correct format, like full screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. So as I said, thank you. I'm presenting today on efforts on ontology development for behavioral and social science research, really focusing on behavioral science. This is a project that Christine Hunter, who is the current director of OBSSR, the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research, and I have been working on for the last 5 or 6 years. We've been in different positions doing that. And I just wanted to go over, let's see if I can click it forward. How can I make it go forward? Page down, there we go. What I'm gonna go over today, just briefly. So first, just let you know that this is coming from a working group run through the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research and related to the OBSSR strategic plan. Want to go over some of the challenges that may or may not be unique to behavioral science and thinking about ontology and terminology development in the behavioral sciences, including the scope of the science and the scope of the multidisciplinary nature of the folks studying behavior, issues around measurement in behavioral science, and then I'm going to describe kind of a multi-pronged approach that we've taken over the years that I think has been cumulative as we've learned more about ontologies. I should say that we all started out in this as subject matter experts in behavior with no subject matter expertise in ontology development. So it's coming from that point of view. And we've tried a variety of ways to attack this issue, and I'm going to go through some of them here. So the first thing to note is that in 2017, OBSSR issued a strategic plan, and in their strategic objective 2 was focused on enhancing and promoting research infrastructure and measures to support a more cumulative and integrated approach to behavioral and social sciences research. And embedded within there, it was included behavioral ontology development. So the rationale for this, I think, will seem familiar. There remains a lack of common vocabulary within the behavioral sciences, which impedes cumulative research and progress. There's a very severe jingle-jangle problem in the behavioral sciences, which limits aggregation across the knowledge base. Also, there are incentives within the behavioral sciences that incentivize and proliferate different theories, constructs, and measures in that it's considered better and more publishable to do something new and different and unique rather than to actually build upon the knowledge base that exists. And I just said that. And of course, the goal here is to improve rigorous and reproducible behavioral science by making sure everybody knows what we're talking about with some consistent definitions and relationships. Just said that. Okay, so the first challenge that occurs to behavioral scientists when trying to think about behavioral science terminology and ontologies is that the scope of behavioral science is large. So behavior is not just one thing, behavior is hundreds, if not thousands of things. And I just want to show you some examples of existing classification or taxonomy schemes to give you a sense of what I mean by that scope. So for example, the WHO has an international classification of functioning, disability, and health, ICF. And within the ICF framework, within the ICF framework, the reference is to health conditions, of course, and they have these categories of that are labeled activity and participation, which cover behavior. Within activity and participation are these types of behaviors. So learning, general tasks and demands, communication, mobility, self-care, domestic life, interpersonal interactions, major life areas, community, social, and civic life. So you can see that's the first level of the breadth of the classification. Now, more recently, and just to note, we didn't have this when we started this project actually, is that Kai Larson, who's one of the leaders in this area, or has been for us, published in 2021 a publication that describes what was a 10-year effort to extract behavior terms from publications using natural language processing tools and subject matter expert-based review, which started with the ICF, taking the ICF terms, and looked across 20 journals in 9 disciplines. And these are a subset of the disciplines involved in behavioral science. And what he has generated and published is illustrated on the right. They started with over 1,000 terms, and they ended up with this hierarchical structure. I just want to note a couple of things. As with almost all of the existing terminology that we have, they're almost all, at best, a kind of hierarchical system that includes parent-child is relationships only. And then I'll also just make a note that not included in this analysis were any behavioral terms related to mental health or what they call unobservable behaviors, such as thought. Okay, so if you want to think about more psychological constructs that we consider that fall in the realm of behavioral science, the American Psychological Association does have both a dictionary and a thesaurus that cover a vast number of terms related to psychology that include mental health terms. Not all of them, of course, are behavioral, but it is covering 90 subfields of psychology. So that's one field with 90 subfields, thousands and thousands of terms. And again, although these are nice controlled vocabularies, and we are making use of them as gold standard definitions, they are limited to psychology. They are hierarchical with is-a relationships only, and perhaps most importantly, these are proprietary tools. So you have to pay to get access. And up until very recently, none of this was really computerized or able to be searched in any way online. That has changed recently. But in 2017, when we started, something like a book existed. So from the OBSSR point of view, this is just another way of looking at the scope of behavioral science. And it's one visualization of the areas of behavioral science that have been prioritized across the 27 NIH institute centers and offices. So again, this is just to give you a sense of how behaviors are, the broad range and the relevance to biomedical research and the possible different ways of grouping. I'll also note in here, as I said, that today I'm focusing mostly on behavioral sciences. The Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research, of course, is also interested in social sciences. And in this figure, we also have social processes and determinants of health, which is something we've also been working on. But that's another whole kettle of fish, really. The next challenge, besides just the scope that I wanted to touch on here, which may or may not be different than other fields, but seems to be fairly unique, is that in the fields of behavioral sciences, measuring behavior is not a clear-cut process. So any behavior can be measured in many different ways, and the different behavioral measures are not equivalent. They're not interchangeable. And they often were developed separately by different groups of people for completely different contexts. One large sort of category of behavioral measurement that exists, or categorization, is the difference between tasks, which are objective, like tests that you take. So somebody might give you a memory task to do, remember 3 words, or something like that, versus surveys, which are subjective reports of, and they might be retrospective, they might be given in proxy, depending who you're trying to survey, if it's a child or someone with dementia, for example, where you're asking questions about behavior. How much did you sleep last night, for example? These different behavioral measures may or may not, and usually we don't know, whether they reflect the same underlying psychological or behavioral construct, or latent variable, if you will. So I'm showing an example here from an actual large MTurk-based study that Russ Poldrak and his colleagues did and published in 2019, focused on the construct or the behavior of self-regulation. And what they did was give large populations of people huge ranges of both surveys and tasks, all of which have been in the literature related to self-regulation. And then they then they essentially did a complex concept mapping procedure. And one of the things that was really interesting about this, which is that, in fact, what you see is that the tasks and the surveys are actually, they're all theoretically measuring self-regulation, but they actually are not grouping together or measuring interrelated, do not seem to be mappable one to the other. Whereas the surveys seem to all be at least somewhat related to some centroid, the tasks are a little more even broadly distributed. So that any time one is talking about self-regulation, there's the issue of how do we define that and what is that a part of? But then there's also this question of, well, and how have we measured it? And what is the quality of that measurement and applicability of that measurement to any other context? So these are, of course, aspects that we'd like to capture in a full ontology. Okay, so just to summarize some of the interrelated challenges in development of ontologies for the behavioral sciences, there's actually no agreed upon or common definition of behavior or function in general across fields. As I noted, there's many different professional and scientific fields who are interested in behavior or behaviors of different types. Again, there's a proliferation of theories and constructs and measures. And the point here with the measures is also that there's a lack of ground truth. So there's no absolutely objective way of saying, this is what self-regulation is, and I know that because I've measured this thing that exists and is unchangeable. There are multiple, not very many maybe, but there are multiple differently labeled and organized hierarchies in this space, but there's a lack of integration across these conceptual frameworks. So I showed you several, there are a few more, but I brought those together. Those frameworks don't necessarily talk to each other. So for example, I've been working in this area in behavioral science for decades, and I've been working on ontology development in behavioral science for many years, and the WHO ICF classification I just learned about within the last month, which perhaps shows my limitations, but it's common. So then there's also a wide range of use cases, of course. So some of them are legal or policy use cases, such as disability determination. More commonly, there might, for NIH perspectives, there are issues in clinical care, and then, of course, all the research use cases. So this is where we were when we started in 2017. If we take the spectrum of development of ontologies from weak to strong semantics, what we had were some controlled lists like the APA thesaurus, or NIMH has a research domain criteria project. Different institutes had different, NCI has a number of lists, but those lists were not at all complete. As I said about the APA thesaurus, again, there are large gaps and it's proprietary. And perhaps the best thing we had were some of the NLM-based taxonomies, such as MESH. And but again, behavioral sciences are have been very poorly represented in MESH. I'll note, I'm not even going to talk about SNOMED because the coverage in SNOMED is, of behavioral science is almost non-existent. MESH is a little bit more inclusive, but still lacking. So that's what we tried to take on, some of these challenges. So I'm just going to go through kind of this multi-pronged approach we took, and this has been, again, an evolving process led by subject matter experts in behavioral science, but not subject matter experts in ontology development. So one of the first things we did was look to see, well, okay, we have this vast literature, to what extent can we use automated tools to extract terms and understand the structure of the relationship between those things. So we tried a little bit of that. We also have worked with a number of specific fields of investigators where we have had research investments to encourage them to develop definitions and controlled vocabularies within their area of science. And I'll give you one example of that. Then again, coming back to MESH, we've been working for a number of years on enhancing representation of behavioral sciences terms in MESH. And then we've been thinking about how to integrate, leverage systems that already exist to potentially link constructs, behavioral terms to their measures. And then we're now in the phase, most recently, of trying to just generally raise the profile among behavioral science and behavioral scientists, and put in some additional funds in this area, and of course continue to make additional contact with our colleagues such as you. Okay, so the first thing we did with the natural language processing was we looked at self-regulation. The reason we looked at self-regulation is because we knew that Russ Poldrack and his colleagues were working on self-regulation ontologies, and we wanted to see how far, and that was from a subject matter, both from a MTurk kind of perspective and from a subject matter perspective. We wanted to see how far we could get with the literature using natural language processing. So we started with, as I said, the sort of available gold standard definitions from the APA thesaurus and MESH. And then as a bunch of subject matter experts, we generated lists of synonyms to sort of enter into the NLP to search for. This is a little bit of just brainstorming around what we know about self-regulation and the different terms people use when they're referring to related concepts. So this analysis was done using tools from the Office of Portfolio Analysis. And at the time, Kirk Baker was working on a contract with the Office of Portfolio Analysis, and Don Morales was a program officer helping us with these analyses on our working group. And this is just a map of similarity. So these are this is a natural language processing based co-occurrence kind of matrix using the various synonyms for self-regulation that we entered in, where the thickness of the line is indicating the frequency of co-occurrence. And one of the interesting things about this analysis to us is that it replicated the division between surveys, terms used as part of surveys and terms used as part of tasks. That's clearly something that exists in the literature as an underlying structure within the literature. So that was neat. What we didn't get, of course, from this was any definitions, any specific relationships between these terms. And they were just showing general co-occurrence is associated with, is frequently used with relationships, which are not necessarily where we really want to be in order to integrate knowledge across the field in the end. So we also have taken across a number of fields a sort of more traditional expert consensus, subject matter expert-based approach to taking a particular behavior or a particular term and asking folks to come to a consensus definition. I'm just here switching to emotional well-being, which is a little bit less than, if not maybe one behavior, but it's one psychological construct. And the reason I'm showing you this example is this is the most recent and probably most complete process that we've done here. So 3 institutes, NIA, NCCIH, Complementary Health, and NICHD have funded 6 networks to investigate the features and mechanisms and health impacts of emotional well-being. And we asked them, because there were 6 networks with individuals from multiple different disciplines and multiple different fields, we asked them to come up with a definition just for the purposes as an exercise as part of this larger process, but also just for the purposes of them communicating with each other successfully. And perhaps as you've encountered before, this seems like a simple task, but in fact is extremely difficult. So within this field of behavioral scientists, first convincing behavioral scientists that having a definition is an important thing requires work. The second thing is then getting them to agree on a definition also, of course, requires significant work. So this definition that you're seeing here is a result of a year of every other week, hour-long meetings, plus the in-between meeting work involved. And this is not an uncontested definition by any means. We got them to settle on it as a working definition. And then one of the things we've been trying to do, again, in terms of outreach and networking and building awareness of the importance of definitions and taxonomies and ontologies within the behavioral sciences, is they published this definition in interactive format in the journal Affective Science, and invited specifically 8 commentaries with the hopes of building an ongoing discussion, both about this definition to help the field, which is relatively early on in its development, and hopefully to enhance the understanding of why having such a definition and thinking about concept maps and ontological relationships beyond that might be important and useful if you're doing research in this area. So again, I've been emphasizing the uptake issue. So, and all along we've been worried about this, okay, we're trying to figure out how to build an ontology within the behavioral sciences or something, how to build structures that would get us to an ontological place in the behavioral sciences. But let's say we built the perfect thing. How are we going to get people in the field to use it? What are they going to use it for? Why are they going to want to, et cetera? And as I said, this is challenging just to even get buy-in from people in the field that the idea is even a good idea. So one of the things we then said was, well, okay, what we'd like to do is build, first of all, leverage infrastructure that already exists. Second of all, use something or work with something that people already use. So if we could make a terminological taxonomy that people are already using, if we could make that better, then that would get us closer to our goal of improving accumulative science. So we turn to MESH, the Medical Subjects Headings system within the National Library of Medicine, where they index journal articles with MESH headings or MESH terms, all of which, of course, have vocabularies and scope notes, et cetera. And it's PubMed, which accesses MESH, is used by most investigators in biomedical research. The other important point here is most investigators, including myself, who use PubMed daily, multiple times a day, have little to no understanding of what they're doing. So of the underlying MESH subject headings, of the best ways to search it, of the definitions of anything. So most people search just in a sort of blank keyword, put in a term, keyword kind of way. That doesn't make use at all, actually, of the power of MESH. However, because people's search results, of course, depend upon the underlying vocabulary and the MESH tree, if we could, the premise here was, if we could improve that underlying vocabulary, people's search results, even with the keyword approach, would be better, would be more accurate and more inclusive, even if they didn't know it. So what we did was start a process, and we've gone through 4 or 5 areas, I'm listing 4 here, where we took those domains that I showed you from the visualization of NIH behavioral science areas. And we said, well, let's check which terms related to, for example, attention, learning, and memory, what are the terms that currently exist in MESH? And let's also get subject matter experts and referring to gold standards to see what are other terms in this area that we think, or synonyms that we think should be included. And probably I've said so twice already, but I'll just say so again. The representation of behavioral terminology in MESH is actually shockingly lacking. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and we've had a lot of help and collaboration with the folks at NLM who are involved in this, and it's been really extremely important to these efforts. So, so what we've done then is, through this process, we have then, of course, MESH has a system for, if you want to add terms, you can suggest terms. So we've so far added 261 no terms and synonyms in attention, learning, and memory, 76 in social determinants of health. For ethnic and racial terms, there were, as you can see, over 5,500 supplementary concept records and synonyms added, which we can talk about later if people are interested in, but that was definitely eye-opening. And then we're currently working on the area of stress and behaviors and behavioral terms related to stress, and we've requested MESH 2024 update with 55 high priority terms, 25 additional terms. And in this case, we also suggested adding specific measures. 37 is an extremely small number, but was a good set that we had some good gold standard references for. And so they've done that. And so shout out to Dan Cho, Marianne Hantakis, Rebecca Goodwin, who have been extremely helpful. So then what we have also wanted to do is analyze, well, are we actually making a difference? So our hypothesis is that if we improve the terminology in MESH, that will actually improve people's searches. And so we have a contract with Lexical Intelligence, which is run by Kirk Baker, and Chicago King there has been helping us with these analyses. And this is one of the analyses she's been doing where she compared the precision and recall and combined measure called F measure of the quality of the search results from 2021, from everything published in all the publications indexed in 2021, which was the year before the update, and the first 4 months of 2022. And we are currently doing the analysis again for all of 2022. So I'm going to try to remember. So precision is one of these is sensitivity and one of them specificity. Sorry, I don't think in terms of precision or recall. But the question is how many? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, maybe sorry to interrupt. I think precision is how many positive that I identified is true positive. Recall is, did I miss anything, like the false positive? The false? Yeah, the negative is, did I miss anything from negative? That actually should be the positive.
Right. And then the F measure is a kind of combination of those. So what I'm just showing here is that before the update, after the update, things are much better. This is now just for the area of, this is just in the area of social determinants of health. So we haven't done the analyses for every single area that we've looked at. And we're expecting that it will get even better if we have the full year data because the indexing continues over the year, but we'll see. So I recognize I'm going on. Okay, so the other thing we've done is to try to leverage projects that we already have ongoing around behavioral measurement. So there's another, it was a Common Fund program run through all the NIH Institutes Common Fund called the Science of Behavior Change, where we're encouraging individuals who are trying to develop behavioral interventions to think about what are the behavioral mechanisms of those interventions and then measure those things. So here's an example of self-regulation. So somebody might be developing an intervention where they're trying to intervene on smoking, let's say, to improve lung cancer. So that's the intervention is a patch, and they're going to put the patch on, and then they're going to look to see rates of lung cancer years later, let's say. And our point is that the best way to develop interventions is to understand, in this case, the patches, to understand what's the intervening or mediating process there. So, for example, you could say a nicotine patch increases self-regulation, assuming one had a definition of self-regulation. So the ability to regulate one's cigarette use. And then how do we measure a change in self-regulation to see if that relates to the measures of health outcomes? And there's a number of behavioral measures here. So this is a system, and there's one of the things that's been part of SOBC, which is 10 or 12 years old, and now NIA is continuing to support the SOBC Coordinating Center, is they have a measures repository. And they've just, OBSSR supplemented the SOBC grant, Coordinating Center grant, with additional funds specifically to do more ontological development work. And part of that process has been to update their measures repository and make it more user-friendly in a number of ways. And what I'm just demonstrating here is that you can go into their measures repository, filter by a behavioral domain, a behavior or behavioral construct, and look to see what kinds of things have been used to measure that. So you have the ability a little bit to capture the relationship is measured by. Okay, and then just the last two things I wanted to say is that, as I noted, we're trying to build buy-in and understanding of the importance of these areas. And so OBSSR and NIA and NSF and a number of professional behavioral science societies funded a National Academies of Sciences consensus study on ontology development, behavioral sciences with these goals. This was recently published in 2022 and has been presented in a number of venues. Their recommendations essentially were everyone should be doing more in this area, in slightly more specific than that, but it's still very useful to have a number of broad thinking experts with some clout make this point. And then our most recent effort is that there's a plan, and what's public here is there are notices of intent to publish, notices of funding opportunity to support accelerating behavioral and social science through ontology development and use. That's going to include a U24 dissemination coordination center in which we're requiring there to be multidisciplinary expertise to try to really bridge this gap between subject matter experts in behavioral science, people with expertise in ontology and informatics, and then team science, of course. And then we'll fund a number of individual research projects which will be use case based. And the goal is to have a number of different teams focused on obviously a number of different use cases, but working together to develop interoperable structures. So this is the list of current working group members, the list of folks who have been helping us most recently with the development of the funding initiatives, including Afia. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions. I can stop sharing maybe.
Yeah, so if you have questions, please raise your hands. Yeah, Helena?
Hi, my name's Helena Schviglin, and I'm at FDA's CDER, and I'm in the Office for Strategic Policies. I just thought this was fascinating and aligned with a number of areas that I've worked in the past in terms of, you know, trying to get terms definitions and things that people will all call the same thing, and you know, even if it's an imperfect definition, you know, at least we have a definition. How do you